So next we've got 5 CISOs coming up. You've probably not been at a session where they've had this many world-class CISOs come on, so I won't introduce them by their long resumes. I'll give you the short and sort of insight here. So Corey Scott was at Confluent. Colleen Coolidge was prior at Twilio. We have a Hall of Fame CISO here with Mr. Youngblood, who I guess they give you a ring for that, or?
It's a yellow jacket.
Oh, yellow jacket, okay. So he's actually in the CISO Hall of Fame. I guess you can go look at his bust in Ohio or wherever they have that. Mariah Hara, who is formerly Fortune 500 CISO. She was also named Cybercrime Magazine's 2024 as one of the top 100 fascinating women in cyber. So great stuff there. And then lastly, from Harvard, I think from Boston, you have to say Harvard, right?
I've not been there long enough.
Okay, right. So Heather Hinton is going to be our host here, and she's going to run through the questions with our panelists. So if you would, please welcome all our panelists to the stage.
Alrighty. So awesome day so far, and I'm really looking forward to all of this. You know, I'm going to start, Colleen, with you. We've been dancing around this, but nobody's actually been quite so blunt. Why NHI security now? Why should I not wait? What about the people whose companies are saying, Wiz is going to add it? Let's just wait till Wiz adds it in. Why now?
Yeah, like Wiz, Palo Alto, Orca, whatever it is, you know, du jour that people have. Yeah, so I guess maybe just going back a bit, I remember when I was talking to Alon, I guess everyone calls him Jackson, so sorry, Jackson, a couple years ago, and I'm like, why is it that people are not really paying attention to this? Because this is an old risk that everybody's been sitting on, right? But it's like not the new hotness. Now it's the new hotness, but it wasn't for such a long time. And before that was like supply chain, and before that CASB, before that whatever. But this is something that all of us have been sitting on for a long time. And I would say from my perspective and the way that he explained it to me, it made me think, well, shoot, we as security leaders, we're supposed to be uncovering these different threats and risks, and we need to be saying them in really in a plain spoken way to our executives and to the board, because they just see this amorphous cloud of risk, but it's up to us to actually name, you know, out of these thousands of things that we need to be afraid of, let me actually stack this up in a way that makes sense. And, you know, you could say this is something that the risk has been growing over time. The more SaaS we're using, the more sort of diffuse everything is, the more of these identities are created. And we're so carefully trying to manage each of our person identities, and we're not thinking at all about all the machine identities. And, you know, we saw an earlier presentation where just that curve just goes way up. And at some point, that's where a lot of the compromises are going to be coming from. And so for you, nowadays, it's risky to be a security leader. We all know that. We've all read the news. So you don't want to be sitting on this, because if you don't surface it, then you're taking that risk, and you sure as hell don't want that. You want to describe that risk, give it to people who get paid more than you, and just be like, I have contextualized this for you, and if you choose not to do something in writing, I will keep that. But yeah, you've got to contextualize it. You have to go out. And then also when you're thinking, how do I pay for this, right? Now that maybe it's mid-cycle and it's not time to actually do your budget. It's not listed on the budget. Shoot, what should I do? There's always a special case type of situation where we know what we know at the time the budget is created, and then sometimes even the budget gets cut. But then as new information comes in, your executives expect you to. They don't like it, but they expect you to, hey, new information happened. That has updated my belief, which means I've updated this risk statement for you. And just want you to know, this is unaccounted for in our budget. I don't want to sit on this risk. I don't think you guys want to sit on this risk. At least let's take the few first steps and get started. Because if you wait for Wiz or Palo Alto, how long is it going to take for that tool that you're using to buy a very good or your favorite NHI software, integrate it, not fire all the people or destroy everything that made that NHI software good, and then give it to you at no extra cost? Because remember, it's not in your budget. They give it to you at no extra cost, and you can just use it. Like, it's just waiting for a bunch of magical, perfect things to happen. And I don't know about you, but I've been in security too long where it's just a lot of magic, terrible things can stack up. So you need to stack the deck. And I would say make that special case. There were so many like slides and that demo today. There's all kinds of evidence that you can use behind that leading statement that you have. In case you don't believe me, look at this demo. In case you don't believe me, look at these charts. So I would say make a special case for it. Make sure it gets taken care of, because if you get popped and you did everything you possibly could, I wouldn't say that, you know, we're in the clear, but you'll be able to sleep better at night. You'll have a better chance of defending yourself. So I'd say get on it.
Yeah, just to add on to that comment too, because, oh, by the way, my non-human identity is a non-expiring token because I stay longer than my life expectancy should be. So this area is really old wine in new bottles, which is an old saying, right? So it's been around a while. And you look at some of these competitors that may be out there that may say, hey, we do this too, we do that too. And if you dive down deeper, and they may actually like do some discovery. They may, you know, do one aspect of NHI, but very few of them are really addressing this holistically and giving you lifecycle management across the board. So you have to look at that, and then, you know, just consider that, you know, this isn't an easy space. There's a 9-letter company that we all have in our environments that I can tell you they've had this on their roadmap for 15 years, and they haven't figured it out yet.
Okay. Mariah, I saw you nodding a lot while Colleen was speaking. What are your thoughts on why NHI now?
SolarWinds. I think everyone's heard of what happened there. That was a direct traversal path into everyone's environment. I was a CISO at a very large bank, one of the largest in North America, and we had servers with the back door on it, and things could have gotten escalated very quickly. What was the lesson there? That's what I like to do. Whenever there's a cyber breach, I'm like, well, what's the lesson for us? Well, all these vendors have a direct, any software vendor, frankly, has a direct path that bypasses all your security layers. So when Salesforce and GitHub and AWS have API keys directly into your environment, guess what? If they're breached, and Microsoft has been breached a couple of times, you know, it's a pathway right directly into your environment. So I would say NHI, especially for critical industries, defense industries, you know, environments that can't afford or are targets of nation state, I think it's an obvious one. I would also say that, you know, so that's the obvious one for me. I do think that when you look at the amount of access they have, I think most people are shocked. You know, that, you know, the privilege creep is pretty bad. I will also say that from a supply chain perspective, because I've built a lot of supply chain programs, this is directly, I mean, I know obviously this falls into the identity and access management category kind of natively, but I think there's a strong supply chain. So if you're trying to justify budgets, as an example, IAM is an easy one. Map it to your NIST frameworks or whatever regulation that you have to comply with. If you look at the SEC for any public companies, you know, access and third party, this is third parties. These are third parties connecting into your applications, and there's very clear language about managing your third party access. So you can, in terms of justifying even a budget, it's you know, mapping it to, well, you know, I now need to do this because I'm a public company. It's pretty obvious.
Okay. So Corey, right, obviously why NHI now, but also, you know, where should it fit within my security program?
I think it ends up pretty adjacent to existing cloud identity or parts of the organization. So, you know, wherever you see identity being created in the cloud or in business systems, that's where you need to inject into that existing process. I'm not a huge fan of like layering technology on top of other technology and making it security specific. Instead, what I really try to do is integrate those best practices into the existing provisioning workflows and offboarding processes, and then using security tools primarily for validation as well as rapid response.
Okay. And so, there's a very strong element of partnership then between whoever is owning the tool and whoever is doing the work. And then I know that you mentioned you have perhaps a story that you could share with us. Maybe starting on the collaboration, what went wrong, what went right, and how did NHI's and Asterix help you in that situation?
So I think ultimately, as I tell the story, do you want me to do that?
Yeah, tell us, yeah.
All right,
I
all
think it's story time, kids.
It's around Halloween time, so it's about time for a bit of a spooky story. So this is kind of a public incident because we did reporting on it, so I can speak relatively freely about it. I had joined Confluent at the beginning of the year, and we were preparing to go, IPO. I had just finished my first kind of set of 90 days kind of risk assessment of the things that I felt we wanted to work on, and one of them happened to be some of the risks around, in this case, over-provisioned, API access. And, one of my favorite phrases was, that any random Yahoo on the internet could use that identity, without any other kind of set of compensating controls. And then, of course, on a Friday afternoon, because that's always when it happens, we get an email from CodeCov. CodeCov is a company that does code coverage analysis in your build pipeline. And they said, sorry, we've been breached. We had malicious code injected into our coverage tool, and it did run in your environment. And as a result, from your build environment, all of your environment variables for all of your builds were sent to a server in Russia.
Yay!
So we obviously spun up an incident right away. And for those who are not quite as familiar with how modern build systems work, and the environment variables are typically all the credentials and identities necessary for a successful build to complete, including all the testing that you typically do as part of that process. And so we had some foresight to isolate our build pipelines and environments so that, and that they were ephemeral, so that a SolarWinds style of attack where persistence was maintained on the underlying build platform could not be obtained through this. However, there was a slew of identities that were in those environment variables, everything from GitHub tokens to cloud credentials to APIs for other test environments. And so what we needed to do was figure out what the heck were these identities, what did they have access to, and how much lateral movement could happen from those non-human identities. Because we didn't have any type of tooling at the time, it was an incredibly manual, painstaking process. Just establishing essentially a multi-day war room with all of the affected parties in order to even identify what the level of exposure was. Because we didn't have that good map, we also didn't have the capability to assess where our visibility gaps were, let alone the access control gaps. As we talked about before, many of these identities are basically root or nothing, at the end of the day. But the other thing we didn't know is how much visibility did we have on those actions? And in particular, there was a fun time to learn that at the time, GitHub was not providing logs on Git pulls. So we couldn't actually tell whether or not those GitHub tokens were actually used by an attacker, only if it had actually accessed through their API. And so We put in the inquiry to GitHub, and we waited and did the rest of our analysis. And because we were blind, because we didn't have that set of inventory, we had to be dependent on GitHub, which we got the following Friday, of course, with, oh yes, with our secret backend logs that we had, all of your source code has been uploaded to a server in Russia. So, thank you. And so then, okay, well, now we got to find all those non-human identities that were embedded in source code. And even, of course, as many of you have probably encountered, is just because someone accidentally committed a secret into a repo, just deleting that repo or that branch by itself doesn't actually get rid of the credential. You have to actually get rid of the underlying commit, because otherwise it's an orphan commit. And attackers know how to use that. And so, again, more non-human identities embedded in that. And so without that visibility, it made things much, much harder. And, oh, by the way, we're going IPO next month. So, and so as a result, that we had to do significant heroics to get ourselves in that good path where we could make strong positive assertions about the underlying security and integrity of our environments in a very challenging situation.
So for those of you that didn't hear it, I heard inventory, inventory, inventory. But Colleen, do you want to change your why NHI now to maybe NHI yesterday?
Yeah, 2 years ago, because just hearing what he had to go through to discover, and then it was layers of discovery, layers of cleanup, and there were probably points where you were like, I think we're done-ish, and you're like, no, sorry. So it's like an ongoing nightmare, and I actually have a question for you. How easy was it after that to be able to get a tool like this?
So we built, Asterisk didn't exist at the time. I wish it did. And so we actually built our own tooling around that. And so when I actually heard that there was a company that was building such as technology that could actually be commoditized and made available, I was very excited to sign up as an advisor to help provide our insights. So yeah, we dedicated multiple security engineers, and we, as the previous panel or discussion highlighted, it's also really important to integrate how you do provisioning of these NHIs with an established opinionated standard, so that you can at least start to bend towards what you actually want it to be, instead of always kind of being on the back foot.
And just a quick note, dovetailing on that, and something else that you said, Mariah, if you can't get it by storming the front gates, then maybe it is part of everything's EOL process. It needs to be accounted for. Everything that you have that has an end of life, think vendor management or every single tool, there's a deprovisioning aspect of it, and the identities that come along with it. Not only should they not have been overprivileged in the first place, but at the very least, you can start chopping them in a timely manner.
Yeah, just to that point of this being, more of a process, right? And, I think everybody struggles with asset management. Anybody here who's figured that out, let me know, because 25 years, I've never heard anybody says, I'm 100% confident in my asset management, particularly in this space here. And although I had an experience, not as impactful as yours, Corey, but still painful to me, of, exposed secrets, and then, applying 10, 15 people to go in and let's clean this up throughout the environment, tens of thousands get cleaned up, and then go back and do another scan and discovery and find another 5,000 just got added back on. So it's a process you've got to have associated with this that you're looking for.
Okay.
I was just going to add, there's been a big theme I've seen in the last 5 years, and a lot of tools actually had successful exits too, in regards to identifying excess privilege of accounts in cloud environments, especially admin access that has access to more than they need. So there's been a good sweep of that. And I think it's to some extent it's education, because people understand an admin account or user account having too much access. But an API key, right,
Yeah.
is I think it's that part of it, and getting the board to understand that, we need to start accelerating a more holistic picture.
Okay, I'm going to throw an unscripted question at you, because Corey, you said something really impactful that you didn't talk about in our rehearsals, which was you had to build it and now you can buy. And I think that there are still companies out there that are having build versus buy conversations based on what you learned, right? Build versus buy, which one in this case?
So I think it's probably a combination. So I also ran engineering teams that was responsible for the underlying infrastructure. Confluent has 50,000 Kubernetes clusters, for example, deployed across all three major cloud providers. We decided to engineer and build our own Spiffy Spire infrastructure for inter-service authentication for a large chunk of those non-human identities, and just build it in, to the underlying infrastructure. That's a massive engineering uplift that only some of the largest cloud infrastructure companies would want to do. But then I still have all these other SaaS and IT applications and the underlying core cloud infrastructure APIs. And so, if I were to, reevaluate today, I think it would definitely lean heavily towards buy for that section.
Yeah,
Well, also, you have to maintain what you build. And you have to ask yourself, is this part of my company or my team's core competency? And,
Yeah, do you want to make yourself a software company all of a sudden, right? If you're not in that toolage. And I'd also say, because I say this to people all the time, you definitely can figure this out manually, but it's a very painful process to do. And even if you build something, maybe you're good at finding service and process accounts. Maybe you're good at finding tokens, but are you going to find OAuth? Are you going to find webhooks? Are you going to find all these other flavors of non-human identities, which again, companies like Asterisk, created a way of discovering these things, and it took them, years to do that, right? So, leapfrog yourself and go ahead and purchase something that'll help you.
Okay. So Mariah, Corey had engineering and security. Not all of us do. And then other people in other organizations, the CISO may own identity. They may, they likely don't. It could be owned by the CIO. It could be owned by HR. Who should own the NHI program in an organization?
Yeah, well, generally, identity and access management programs in companies are designed by the CISO. And there's usually a head of IAM in most large companies, and there's a very specific structure and strategy, and then the CIO team typically implements it. Or if it's very mature, they keep outsourcing more and more parts of it. So this falls squarely, in my mind, in the IAM practice of most organizations. So whoever the director or head of IAM, Identity Access Management, most companies, is the one that would be most interested. Having said that, I think there's other stakeholders like privacy, like supply chain, like third-party management. So I, had cyber risk at one telco, and one of the things I own is third-party risk. And, I'm looking at this problem from the supply chain perspective, because I have third parties accessing my environment, and they may have access privilege, or they shouldn't be there anymore. So, when I met, Jackson initially, and he told me about the problem space, I was thinking of myself, how many of us just let Google a single sign-on access a lot of third-party personal accounts because you're just too lazy. And that the DevOps environments is doing the same thing for their automation, like you guys are talking about. And so I think if it can fall in DevOps, like we're talking about, I think it can fall in supply chain. But I think typically where this squarely belongs from a risk perspective, understanding the risk, getting the budget would be IAM. In my case, we don't necessarily have a head of IAM, so I may lead this from a supply chain perspective, work with the DevOps folks and my privacy partners to explain. Again, I think it's some education because this is a bit of a new risk that we're under, that people are talking about, and get my partners to buy in.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, there's an old African proverb, and it says, "It takes a village to raise a child." And
Takes a child to raise a village.
yeah, it's like yeah, sometimes, right? And it's interesting because this is a problem that is it's not just security's problem, right? And I think something that Albert said, hey, I had to get everybody else on board with this, and this is definitely a space, like I said, development's got something to do with it. You got ops has something to do with it. You've got business units that have something to do with it. So you've got to get everybody on board with that. And then where it lands, it could differ, right? Because this is kind of a vulnerability, type of problem. And maybe it fits well in security operations, right? We're chasing those things down. But when it comes to kind of managing kind of the deprovisioning, provisioning stuff, definitely it's something that's in identity.
I think one of the things is that you can't expect your IAM team necessarily to understand all the nuances of every SaaS application's kind of core sets of roles and what does this mean if you put in this group versus that group. So you definitely have to engage and have business systems teams and DevOps teams participate. One carrot that I've found in this type of engagement is that typically when you find unused identities or API keys or redundant other kinds of redundant things, it ends up being a cost savings. So one of the things that we've found is by doing these types of programs that we've seen reductions in cloud spend and also freeing up licenses. And so in some cases, you can kind of win some friends by doing that.
It's almost like you're running an internal bounty.
At Confluent, we actually had a cost bounty. So if you found anything that was redundant or overly expensive or something that wasn't being used, as long as you didn't introduce it yourself, you would be paid a bounty, yeah.
Or I actually find that very interesting because in terms of asking for a budget, if you can lead in with ROI and savings, like, you're done. I mean, so I'm just curious, what were some of the biggest areas of savings that you were able to get?
Definitely test infrastructure in like GCP, Azure, and AWS, where the engineer who had built a reasonable set of testing for a bug that existed 2.5 years ago, and it's still running, and that developer isn't even here anymore. And so, and that the software product's been deprecated, but the test is still running and consuming resources, and it's an identity that has permissions. Yeah, let's get rid of that one. And so, those were the types of things that we would see. Test failed successfully. Very good.
How often do you hear that kind of story, Tim, when Asterix is talking to, or when you're talking to Asterix customers? Oh, we found all of this stuff, and now we're deprecating it, and we've saved, and that's now covered the cost of the license. How common is that?
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if it specifically cover the cost of the license, but definitely, people are going to discover things they did not know about, right? And to Corey's point, there's probably processes that are running that have been orphaned that have been part of these things too. And anybody that's in the cloud knows it's not cheap, right? So workloads that are just sitting there spinning, doing nothing, you can actually save a significant amount of money getting rid of that stuff if you have a process to go and discover it. And so that's just a place where, a tool like Astra can help in that. And I think over time, definitely, it could definitely offset some of the costs.
Another area that I wanted to sort of poke a little bit about is that when we were talking about sort of who should own, there was a real theme of partnership, right? And it's almost like who owns it actually doesn't really matter so much as have you got everybody on board for the journey? So, Colleen, talk about how you bring people along the journey for NHI. And you're not typical stakeholders, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back earlier, like this is a company problem. This is like a whole company problem, and everybody has contributed, whether they know it or not, to make this as bad as it is. So, I mean, something that I'm fond of doing, and I don't know if this works out in every environment, it's always worked for me, but it's probably because I bulldoze my way with it, is I like to pit teams against each other in friendly competition. What I mean by that is, if you introduce this, you know, how many times have you emailed everyone or you got a space at all hands to say like, hey, I'm gonna kick off this thing, it's gonna reduce this risk, did you know, blah, blah, blah. You do this whole thing. And then at some point you struggle through it, you get done, and then you're done 8 months later. I think that something that can keep this effort going and then encourage other people to start baking it into their own processes so they don't keep continuing to make the problem that you then have to clean up again, is just have ongoing metrics. And so metrics are a pain for all of us security people. And so the way that I look at it is every metric that I would make my team or myself do and put together, it also needs to selfishly serve our purpose. And so the ones where you're playing this team against this engineering team, against IT, against whatever, I would just have the name of that VP or SVP at the top of that stack. It's a report card. You're an elementary school teacher. You get to cut what grade it is. And they get to see what their standings are week by week. You can publish like who's winning, who's losing, who's getting worse, fastest mover, best security champion. And you might feel like, that feels really pedantic, Colleen. These are not school children. I've been able to do this with people who were over 50, and you
But they act like school children.
Oh, yes. But they will fall in line because nobody wants to be on a big chart and be the one that's red, be the one that basically is labeled losing.
And that's what we do for vulnerability management for years.
for everything.
And I'm just, just a thought actually. So I'm standing up a VM program, adding these stats, right? What asterisks, the findings.
Students.
More from a vulnerability management perspective.
But personalize it. You don't want to say like this engineering manager because they might not be high enough and they may not have all that control. But their VP definitely has
Very
control.
competitive.
And that is who you're grading. Are they an A student or are they an F student, and who needs to know?
It works.
it works.
It's mean, but you got to do it, guys.
Yeah, we sometimes call that the I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. Yeah. Let's turn it open to some questions for the audience, because I suspect that I hope that there's a long list of questions for people here, so we'll get that kicked off.
Tell me, whoever wants to answer, about the sort of comparative value of NHI security versus IAM, and then in terms of how you manage your spend. I know that some of this is going to be new for a lot of people. I think someone made some comments about this being an unbudgeted item. I get that piece. But assuming you've addressed it, how does this stack up in terms of the percentage of your spend along with your other programs?
I can't answer the percentage of spend, but I'm going to just give you like a quick tidbit that I would offer to have someone else go do that part, which is if you think about all of the totality of IAM risk, all the different subcategories, if it were like a jigsaw puzzle of like 12 pieces, what you can show is what your current approach and your current set of tools aren't solving. So those would be the red puzzle pieces. And so that's how you can just then point, here's a gap. As far as percentages, that's not my thing. I'm not that smart.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, tools in this category are not going to be at the same expense as, enterprise identity management platforms, right? I mean, those
Like
aren't-
SailPoint.
Yeah, it's a different stratosphere, right? But, I think a good way to look at this is like, okay, where can I get the biggest risk reduction for the bang of my buck, right? And you look at tools like this that also help you with third-party risks, which you've got risk exposure there. You've got, all of these orphaned accounts that, are in the cloud, even on-prem, that, are not currently being managed, that are causing that exposure. And you've seen enough case studies to say that it could happen to me, so I can at least, show that I'm reducing the risk and the actual cost of what a breach would entail by instituting a tool like this. And so you drive that to a source, the cost savings aspect of that, and then of course some of the operational efficiencies you may be able to gain by it too.
Corey, I saw you about to pick up your mic. I'm going to explicitly say, so after you had your event, spend on NHI versus spend on IAM, did 50-50? Did you have to cannibalize IAM to cover NIH?
So the incident in this case exposed, a set of things that we really needed to work on that it was even wider than just identity. And so we had an entire 2-year uplift project that we separately funded that included the identity aspects as well as cloud hardening and a bunch of other things as well. And really for an engineering driven organization, the budget wasn't a line item for something that I cut to a vendor, but rather engineering time from all these different groups that were shipping product, and how do we balance and those types of trade-offs. So for us, it was less about the kind of the vendor spend and more about the opportunity cost.
Yeah, and I just want to answer, it depends on your organization, but I've worked for really big companies, and now I'm at a Fortune 500, but I would consider it more of a medium-sized company. Millions and millions of dollars go to things like integrated IAM, like SailPoint every year, and I hate spending that amount of money. But it's like these massive costs because usually the regulators want to make sure that you have a centralized dashboard for access management to the hundreds or thousands of different applications strewn all over. So a product like this, I would say, is a very small amount compared if you're spending at that rate. I would say for the amount of risk that it's mitigating, the bang for your buck the ROI is huge. And I don't know, I haven't gotten into costing yet, although my team is going to be looking at the solution, but I'm guessing, again, it's maybe like a 5%, depending on how big your budget can be and what you're doing. Because, I don't know, Alon, how expensive are you?
Put up the pricing page.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I would also add another thing to think about that too is time to value. So a tool like this, is fairly quick to get deployed, and then to get kind of immediate value from it and start to see some of those things we talked about as far as reducing risk and finding operational efficiencies, and just eliminating some of the exposure that you've been living with for years.
Let me ask a follow-up specifically about that point. Part of the business case that I'm building for a tool like Asterisk is reduction potentially in the premiums for our cyber insurer, because we're handling this new frontier of risk better than our peers, better than other companies, et cetera. Have any of you tried to make that case to your cyber breach insurer about, hey, look at what I've done, look at the advancements I make, look how I've lowered our risk, you should make your insurance policy cheaper?
I haven't done that, but it's a really damn good idea. Particularly when you have the dashboards to show this is what it looked like before we were handling it, this is what it looks like now. We're not saying there's zero risk, but we are tackling the areas that, before nobody had visibility into, like this is how we're maturing, lower our rate. I'm sure that whoever your vendor manager is that would negotiate can definitely use that as ammo. There's no guarantee that you would ever get the price that you want, but it's just another tool.
Yeah, and I would say it's a great differentiator, between maybe you and other people in your industry who may not be doing this. And then, I've talked to enough underwriters that, that's how they kind of look at it. Like, what is everybody else in the industry doing? And then, if you're shown like, hey, I'm adding that level of protection to a pending threat that I know is impacting us, then yeah, absolutely, you build a case for saying, hey, I should be at, a lower premium.
So because we now really truly are between lunch and everybody else, Tim, we've had this amazing day. What has just stood out to you the most as the most impactful takeaway from today that you want to share with us?
Yeah, just quickly, a few things. One, all of my analogies are related to wine, so I'm hoping there's some wine back there. So, so NHI does not get better with time. It is not a fine wine. So that's one of the things coming out. Like waiting to try to address this is not helping you. There's enough case study of issues that are happening to you today. The first thing you should do is start to analyze and put this as part of your threat profiling. I think, too, we all understand that using a tool like Asterisk or just addressing the NHI space can help you with third-party risk, which is something we've all had issues dealing with. And then I think 3, just understanding that this is a process. This isn't something you install, you turn it on one time and you turn it off. You've got to have a whole life cycle around this. And so it's important for you to have the governance and then something that supports that governance.
Yeah,
Colleen, quick takeaway?
Yeah, quick question actually before we go eat something, maybe drink some wine. For the Asterisk folks, for anybody who is really at that critical point where they have to build that case, like this gentleman right here, can we make any of that, the collateral available to them so that they don't have to like screenshot it and whatever it is, they can just have it and that can just be more evidence?
100%. We can put the QR code after and it's available there.
Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, so just in case you didn't hear, Jackson will make the QR code available and people can use it. Mariah, any last minute thoughts or takeaways, things you want people to think about when they're meeting?
Education, I think it's needed, and I think people just haven't been thinking about it, right? So it's being able to articulate the risk to the stakeholders, and I think the light bulbs are going to go off, and I think this has to be part of, to me, a solid IAM program, and I think the DevOps world is the ones that are going to be impacted the best.
Corey, final thoughts?
Enjoy lunch.
All righty, that's the on-stage hook. Thank you very much, everybody.